They called him the God of War, a man who had forgotten the sound of his own heartbeat in the roar of battle. Alpha King Samuel Vane ruled not through diplomacy, but through the crushing weight of black leather and steel. But the world was wrong about how to break a king. It didn't take an army or a silver blade to bring him to his knees. All it took was the trembling, scarred hand of a blind Omega who didn't even know she was touching a monster. When her fingers brushed his pulse, the beast that had ravaged continents didn't bite. It bowed. The ballroom of the Silver Moon Pack was a cage of sensory overload that Elise Reed had learned to navigate like a ghost. To the sighted, it was a display of opulence, chandeliers dripping with diamonds and velvet drapes that cost more than a servant's life. To Elise, it was a suffocating maze of expensive perfumes, the acidic scent of anxious sweat, and the sharp, metallic tang of fear. She stood in the shadows near the kitchen doors, her fingers curled tightly around the edges of a heavy silver tray. Tonight was the winter solstice ball, but there was no joy in the air. The atmospheric pressure in the room had dropped, a primal warning that an apex predator was approaching. "Don't you dare drop a single glass, you blind wretch," a voice hissed in her ear. Elise didn't need to see the face to know it was Lydia, the mate of Alpha Julian. Lydia's perfume always smelled of synthetic roses and unadulterated malice. It was a scent that usually preceded a slap or a shove. "I won't, Luna," Elise whispered, keeping her head bowed. Elise had lived in shades of blurry darkness since the accident that killed her parents when she was a pup. In the Omegaverse, a blind Omega was considered a defect, a mouth to feed with no utility. She was kept only because the former Alpha had owed her father a blood debt. But under the current Alpha, Julian, she was nothing more than a maid who was easy to kick because she never saw the blow coming. Suddenly, the music stopped. The chatter died a sudden, violent death. The heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall groaned open, and a shift in energy rippled through the floorboards. It felt like a storm front moving in. Heavy footsteps echoed. Thud, thud, thud. Slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly heavy. "Your Majesty," Alpha Julian's voice wavered, stripped of its usual bravado. "We are honored by your presence." "Skip the pleasantries, Julian." The voice cut through the silence like gravel grinding against granite. It was deep, vibrating through the soles of Elise's worn-out shoes. It was a voice devoid of warmth, a sound stripped of its humanity. This was Samuel Vane. Rumor had it his inner wolf, Ragnar, was a beast of pure hate that had killed his own parents, and every mate the council had tried to pair him with. "I am here because the council requires a visit to every territory once a decade," Samuel continued, his tone bored and lethal. "I have fulfilled my duty. I will be leaving within the hour." "But the feast," Julian started, sounding desperate. "I eat when I am hungry. I am not hungry." Elise tried to make herself invisible, pressing her back against the cold stone wall. She just needed to survive 60 minutes, just 1 hour of staying in the shadows. "More wine!" Julian barked, his embarrassment turning into rage. He snapped his fingers toward the servants. "Now!" Elise took a steadying breath. She knew this room by heart. 18 steps to the center, a slight left, 12 steps to the high table. She pushed off the wall. The heavy tray of crystal flutes balanced on her forearms. The room was so silent that the only sound was the soft rustle of her gray servant's dress. 10 steps. 11. 12. She was doing it. She was holding steady. But she didn't account for the sudden rustle of silk to her left. She didn't see Lydia's stiletto heel shoot out like a snake. Elise's shin collided with the sharp metal. She pitched forward. Time seemed to liquefy. She gasped, her grip on the silver tray slipping. She was falling into the open space, directly into the path where the king stood. Crash! The sound of shattering glass was deafening. Champagne sprayed across the marble like rain. Elise hit the floor hard, her palms landing directly on the shards of crystal. A sharp, stinging pain sliced through her hand, but the terror in her chest was far worse. She had crashed at the feet of the god of war. "You stupid, useless girl!" Julian roared. Elise heard him rushing toward her. She felt his hand tangle in her hair, yanking her head back with such force she cried out. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she sobbed, blood dripping from her hand onto the pristine white floor. "I will kill you for this disrespect," Julian screamed, his hand whistling through the air as he prepared to deliver a blow that would likely break her jaw. Elise flinched, squeezing her sightless eyes shut, waiting for the impact. But the blow never landed. Instead, a low, vibrating growl filled the room. It didn't sound like a wolf. It sounded like tectonic plates shifting. It was the sound of a predator claiming his kill. "Drop her." The command wasn't shouted. It was a whisper that carried the weight of a mountain. The air grew so thick with alpha command that Elise heard people in the crowd gasping, their knees hitting the floor instinctively. Julian froze. Elise could feel him trembling so violently that his grip on her hair became erratic. "Your Majesty, she is just a clumsy servant. A defect. I said." The king's voice was now inches away. "Drop her, or lose the arm." Julian released her instantly. Elise crumbled to the floor, clutching her bleeding hand to her chest. She was shaking, her breath coming in ragged hitches. The scent of the king was overwhelming her now. It smelled of ozone, ancient pine, and fresh blood. It was the scent of a winter storm. She heard the leather of his boots crunching on the broken glass. He was standing directly over her. "Look at me," he demanded. Elise shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I can't, Your Majesty. I'm sorry. Please don't kill me." There was a long, agonizing pause. The aggression in his scent shifted, not away, but into something intensely, dangerously curious. "Why can you not look at me?" "I am blind, Your Majesty," she whispered. The silence stretched again. Then, Elise felt something she never expected. She felt heat. A large, rough hand reached down, but instead of grabbing her throat, it gently took her wrist. The touch was electric. A jolt of golden sparks shot up her arm, zipping through her veins and hitting her heart like a hammer. She gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Samuel Vane froze. As his skin touched hers, a roar erupted, not from the room, but from the depths of his soul. It was a guttural, animalistic sound of possession. "Mine." The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The entire Silver Moon Pack watched in horror. King Samuel Vane, the man who had beheaded alphas for looking him in the eye, was currently kneeling on the floor amidst broken glass and spilled champagne. But the twist wasn't just that he had found his mate. The twist was what Elise felt through his hand. The monster everyone feared wasn't attacking. Through their soul bond, Elise felt the king's inner wolf, the legendary Ragnar. And for the first time in 20 years, the beast wasn't snarling. In the darkness of Elise's mind, she felt the giant wolf lay down. It rolled onto its back. It bared its throat to her. The Alpha King hadn't just found a mate. He had found the only creature in the world his wolf would ever obey. The journey to the Obsidian Palace took 4 grueling hours. For the entirety of the drive, Samuel did not speak. He drove the massive SUV through the winding mountain passes, with a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, his presence filling the cabin like a gathering storm. Elise sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap over the silk handkerchief he had used to bind her wounds. The leather seat was heated, a luxury that felt like witchcraft against her skin. but she couldn't stop the tremors racking her frame. In her world of shadows, silence was never empty. It was a canvas for her fears to paint upon. She could smell him, the sharp, ozone scent of a coming blizzard mixed with something deeper, like ancient earth and sandalwood. Every time he shifted gears, his arm brushed against the sleeve of her dress, and that jolt of golden electricity crackled through her again. "You are shaking," Samuel said abruptly. The sound of his voice, low and rough, made her jump. I am cold, Samuel," she lied. She wasn't cold. She was terrified. She had spent her life being a useless Omega, and now she was in the hands of a man who broke kingdoms for sport. She felt like a bird that had been rescued from a cat, only to find itself in the talons of a hawk. "There is a blanket in the back. Reach for it." She hesitated, her hands fumbling blindly in the space behind her seat, until her fingers brushed something impossibly soft. Cashmere. She pulled it around her shoulders, the weight of it offering a small, physical comfort. "Thank you," she whispered. "Stop thanking me for basic necessities," he growled, though the bite was missing from his tone. "And stop acting like you are waiting for a blow. You are in my car. You are under my protection." But protection, Elise realized, as they pulled into the palace gates, felt a lot like a prison. When the car stopped, the air outside changed. It was thinner, sharper, smelling of pine needles and stone. Samuel didn't wait for her to find her footing. He swept her up into his arms again, carrying her into the vastness of the obsidian palace. The acoustics told her the ceilings were high enough to house giants, and every footstep echoed like a heartbeat. "Beta Elias!" Samuel's voice roared, making Elise flinch. "Alpha, you're back early. We weren't—" A second voice, lighter and more rhythmic, cut off sharply. "Sir, you are holding a girl." "Observant as always, Elias. This is Elise. She is your queen. If anyone looks at her sideways, gouge their eyes out." "Queen?" Elias squeaked. "But the council, the lineage, the council can rot," Samuel snapped. "Prepare the east wing. I want the healers here in 10 minutes. Her hand needs stitching." "I can do it myself," Elise said softly, trying to reclaim some shred of agency. "It's just a scratch." "It is a laceration caused by lead crystal," Samuel said, his voice dropping into that terrifyingly possessive register. "Be silent, Elise. I will decide what is a scratch." This was Samuel's mistake. In his desperation to protect the only thing that had ever brought peace to his inner wolf, he forgot that Elise was a person, not a prize. He carried her to a room that smelled of lavender and fresh linen, placing her on a bed that felt like a cloud, but his commands were chains. "Stay here," he ordered. "Do not leave this room." "I don't even know where the door is, Samuel," she pointed out, her voice trembling with a sudden surge of frustration. There was a long pause. She heard him shift his weight, the mattress dipping as he sat on the edge of the bed. He took her injured hand in his large, calloused fingers surprisingly gentle as he began to clean the wound himself, not waiting for a healer. "Why?" Elise asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Why me? I am a blind Omega servant. You could have anyone. Why did your wolf choose this?" Samuel stopped moving. His thumb brushed against her wrist, sending that addictive warmth through her veins. "Do you know what my wolf is, Elise?" he asked quietly. "They say he is a monster." "He is," Samuel agreed, and for the first time, she heard the sheer exhaustion in his voice. "Ragnar is a creature of pure violence. For 20 years, he has never known silence. He paces in my mind, screaming for blood. He is a storm that never ends. But the moment I touched you, the storm stopped. For the first time in my life, there is silence in my head. You are not nothing, Elise. You are the only thing that keeps the monster at bay." Elise felt a chill that the cashmere blanket couldn't warm. He didn't love her. Not yet. He needed her. She was a sedative for his beast. She was a tool for his sanity. "Rest," he said, his tone returning to that of a commander. "I have matters to attend to. Do not leave." The door clicked shut, and the lock turned with a finality that echoed through the room. Elise sat in the dark, clutching the silk handkerchief. She was safe from the silver moon pack, but she was now a prisoner of a king who saw her as his only cure. She lay back on the pillows, feeling the immense weight of the palace pressing down on her. Just as she began to drift into a fitful sleep, she heard it. A low, mournful howl coming from somewhere deep within the palace walls. It wasn't a sound of victory. It was a sound of a wolf that was terrified of losing the light it had just found. And in the silence that followed, Elise realized that the most dangerous thing about Samuel Vane wasn't his anger. It was his desperation. Morning in the Obsidian Palace didn't come with light for Elise. It came with the change in the scent of the air. The smell of burning pine from the hearth grew faint, replaced by the crisp, ozone-heavy breath of the mountains as someone opened the heavy balcony doors. Elise sat up, her fingers instantly finding the silk sheets beneath her. They were smooth, too smooth. They lacked the friction of the burlap sacks she had slept on for years. To her left, she heard the rhythmic thrum of a heartbeat. It was heavy and steady, like a drum played underwater. "You're awake," Samuel said. He was sitting in a chair by the fire, his voice carrying a jagged edge of sleeplessness. "How long have you been sitting there?" Elise asked, pulling the duvet to her chin. "Since the moon set." She heard him stand, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He approached the bed, and the air around her heated up instantly. He didn't touch her, but he was close. So close she could hear the slight catch in his breath. "I have brought you things," he announced. It wasn't an invitation, it was a statement of fact. She heard the rustle of fabric, heavy velvets and light silks, and the metallic clink of jewelry hitting a wooden table. "I don't need things, Samuel. I need to understand what happens now." "What happens now is that you are safe," he said, his voice dropping into that low, possessive growl. "I have ordered the finest seamstresses to make you a wardrobe. The healers will be here shortly to check your eyes. If there is a way to restore your sight, I will buy it, no matter the cost." "And if there isn't?" Elise's voice was a mere whisper. "Then you will remain here, where the world cannot touch you." He reached out then, his fingers brushing her wrist. He slid something cold and heavy over her hand. It was a silver bracelet, intricately carved, with a heavy charm that felt like a smooth, rounded stone. "What is this?" she asked, her fingers tracing the metal. "It is the mark of the obsidian crown," Samuel said. "Any wolf who sees this, who smells the scent of my magic embedded in the silver, will know you belong to me. They will not dare to speak to you. They will not even look at you." Elise's heart sank. She didn't feel honored. She felt branded. This was his mistake. The fatal error of a man who had only ever known how to conquer or destroy. He was treating her like a sacred relic he had stolen from a temple, something to be locked behind glass and worshipped in the dark. "I am not a statue, Samuel," she said, her voice gaining a rare edge of steel. "I lived in the shadows of the Silver Moon Pack for years, but I was at least among people. You're talking about burying me in this palace." "I'm talking about keeping you alive," he snapped. Suddenly, the room was filled with the scent of burning ozone. Ragnar, the wolf, was reacting to Samuel's frustration. Elise heard a low growl that didn't come from a throat, but seemed to vibrate from the very air itself. Samuel's breathing became ragged. "Elise!" "Run!" he gasped. "Get to the corner of the room. He is angry that you are defying me." But Elise didn't run. She didn't feel the fear she should have. Instead, her own wolf, that tiny, quiet thing that had been suppressed by years of abuse, pushed her forward. She reached out, her hand finding Samuel's chest. He was trembling, his muscles like coiled iron. Under her palm, his heart was racing so fast it felt like it might burst. "It's okay," she murmured, her thumb tracing the line of his collarbone. "I'm not leaving, but you have to listen to me." The growling stopped instantly. The room went silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Samuel leaned his forehead against hers, his breath hot against her skin. "The silence," he whispered, his voice broken. "The moment you touch me, the screaming stops. Do you have any idea what it's like to live for 2 decades with a beast that wants to tear the world apart? And then, to find the only person who can make it sleep?" He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him. It wasn't a romantic embrace. It was the desperate cling of a drowning man. "I will give you anything," he vowed into her hair. "Dresses of gold, a throne of obsidian, the heads of your enemies. Just do not ask me to let you go where I cannot see you." Elise stayed still, her face pressed against his chest. She realized then that she wasn't just his mate. She was his tether to humanity, and a tether was just another word for a leash. The moment was shattered by a sharp, urgent knock on the door. Samuel stiffened, his protective instincts flaring back to life. He shoved Elise behind him, his claws extending with a terrifying shing sound. "I said no interruptions," he roared. "Alpha," a voice called from the hallway. It was Elias, the beta, and he sounded genuinely frightened. "The council is here. Lord Valerius has arrived with the High Priestess. They are demanding to see the girl. They are invoking the ancient laws, Samuel. They say an Omega cannot sit on the throne without a trial of worth." Samuel's growl returned, deeper and more lethal than before. "They want a trial. I'll give them a trial of blood." "Samuel, no," Elise whispered, grabbing his arm. "They want to take you from me, Elise," he said, turning to her, his eyes likely glowing that predatory gold. "They think you are a weakness I've developed. They don't realize you are my only strength." He grabbed her hand, his grip almost too tight. "We are going to the Great Hall. You will wear the silk I brought, you will wear the silver I gave you, and you will not say a word." As he led her out of the room, Elise felt the weight of the silver bracelet on her wrist. It felt heavier than it had moments ago. As they walked through the labyrinthine corridors, she realized the guards weren't just standing at attention. They were following them, a phalanx of steel surrounding her. She wasn't being led to a throne. She was being led to a battlefield, and she was the prize that neither side intended to ask permission from. The doors to the Great Hall groaned open, and the scent of 100 different wolves hit her. The sour smell of judgment, the dry scent of old parchment, and one smell that stood out above the rest. The cold, sharp scent of wolf's bane and ambition. "There she is," a smooth, oily voice echoed through the hall, the little miracle of the silver moon. Elise felt Samuel's body vibrate with the urge to kill. She squeezed his hand, her heart hammering. The trial was beginning, but she had the sickening feeling that the truth everyone was looking for was something no one in this room was prepared to handle. The Great Hall of the Obsidian Palace was a cavern of black marble and jagged architecture, designed to make anyone standing in its center feel small. As Elise walked beside Samuel, the silence of the room was so absolute, it felt like a physical weight against her eardrums. She didn't need eyes to know that hundreds of people were staring at her, their collective judgment a cold, prickly sensation against her skin. Samuel's hand was a scorched earth of tension on her arm. She could feel the ripple of his muscles, the way his alpha aura flared outward like a protective shield. "Lord Valerius," Samuel's voice boomed, vibrating off the vaulted ceiling. "You called for an emergency session. Speak before I lose my patience." "Your Majesty," the smooth, oily voice replied. Elise recognized it instantly, the scent of rubbing alcohol and old parchment she had noticed earlier. It was a sterile, cold smell. "We merely seek to preserve the integrity of the throne. The law states the queen must be of alpha blood, or at least a wolf of proven standing." Elise heard the scuff of leather as Valerius circled them. She felt his gaze, a greasy, unwelcome touch. "This is a blind Omega, a servant who, by all accounts, was being prepared for exile by the Silver Moon Pack. Do you truly expect the Northern Territories to bow to a woman who cannot even see the crown on her own head?" "She sees more than you ever will, Valerius," Samuel growled, the sound beginning deep in his chest. "Perhaps. But the council demands the trial of the Moonstone," Valerius said, his tone triumphant. "If the Moon Goddess has truly blessed this union, the stone will glow white. If she is a fraud, or simply insufficient, the stone will burn the unworthy from the room." A murmur of shock rippled through the hall. Elise felt Samuel's grip on her arm tighten to the point of pain. "The Moonstone hasn't been used in 3 centuries, Samuel hissed. "It is an artifact of the first line. It kills anyone whose spirit is too weak to contain its magic. I will not let you touch her." "If you refuse, Samuel," Valerius said quietly, "you prove her unworthiness. And you prove your own abdication of the law. You will lose the crown by sunset." Elise felt the internal war raging inside Samuel. Ragnar was screaming, clawing at the walls of his mind, to be let out so he could tear Valerius's throat from his body. But Elise also felt something else, a strange, magnetic pull. The air in the center of the room had begun to hum. It was a low-frequency vibration that made the silver bracelet on her wrist grow warm. It wasn't the sound of a stone. It was the sound of a heartbeat. "I will do it," Elise said. Her voice was small, but in the vast silence of the hall, it carried like a bell. "No, Elise," Samuel whispered, turning to her. "You don't understand. It's not just a test. It's a death sentence for most." "Trust me," she murmured, reaching up to find his face. Her fingers brushed his jaw, feeling the jagged edge of his fear. "I have lived in the dark my whole life, Samuel. I am not afraid of a little more shadow." The high priestess approached. She smelled of sage, dry earth, and a staggering amount of ancient power. Elise heard the heavy clunk of a lead box being placed on a pedestal. "Place your hand upon the stone, child," the priestess croaked. Samuel let go of her waist slowly, his fingers trailing off her skin as if he were losing his last connection to the world. Elise stepped forward, navigating by the hum of the artifact. It felt like standing near a static-charged screen, magnified 1,000 times. She reached out. Her fingertips brushed the cold, jagged surface of the meteorite. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No pain, no light, no heat. Then, the truth revealed itself. It started in her mind. The blurry fog that had defined her existence for 20 years didn't just clear. It exploded. But she wasn't seeing the world of the living. She saw energy. A shockwave of violet light erupted from the stone, but it didn't stay on the pedestal. It raced up Elise's arm, through the silver bracelet, which acted like a conductor, and into her chest. Elise gasped, her head snapping back. "Look!" Valerius shrieked, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the stone. The moonstone wasn't glowing white. It was pulsing with a deep, swirling indigo and violet, the colors of the spirit realm. The high priestess fell to her knees, her forehead hitting the marble. "The spirit walker," she whispered in awe, "the lost lineage of the first mother." In Elise's vision, the room was no longer dark. She saw Samuel, not as a man, but as a towering pillar of molten gold and shadow. She saw his wolf, Ragnar, a massive black entity coiled within him, but the beast wasn't snarling. It was looking at her with a profound, soul-deep recognition. She saw the wrought green aura of Valerius, a sickly, festering energy of betrayal. But most of all, she saw herself. She wasn't a defect. She was a conduit. The blindness hadn't been a curse. It had been a protective cocoon, waiting for this specific catalyst to break. The violet light swirled around her like a tornado, lifting her hair, the sheer force of the energy knocking the guards back. And then, the fog in her physical eyes began to thin. For the first time in 2 decades, she saw the outlines of the world. She saw the grandeur of the black pillars. She saw the terrified faces of the council. And she saw him. Samuel stood 10 feet away, his molten gold eyes wide with terror, and a love so fierce it made her breath hitch. He looked exactly like his voice felt, rugged, powerful, and desperately lonely. "Samuel," she whispered, and for the first time, she was looking directly into his eyes. The light vanished as quickly as it had come. The stone went dormant, leaving the room in a stunned, ringing silence. Elise stood there, blinking, her eyes, usually a cloudy gray, now swirling with flecks of violet and silver. The truth was out. She wasn't just a queen. She was an oracle, a spirit walker whose blood predated the very laws Valerius was trying to use against her. Valerius scrambled back, his face pale. This is a trick, a witch's glamour. He reached into his jacket, and Elise's new vision caught the flash of something dark and metallic, a remote detonator. He hadn't just planned a trial, he had planned an assassination. "Samuel!" Elise cried out, her voice sharp and clear. "The pillars! 3 o'clock! Move!" Before the words had even left her lips, a deafening explosion ripped through the east wall. The world did not go dark for Elise when the explosion ripped through the great hall. It went gray. A suffocating blanket of pulverized marble and ancient dust billowed outward, blinding the hundreds of wolves who relied on their sharp, physical sight. Screams of panic replaced the high priestess's chants, and the air turned bitter with the scent of sulfur and ozone. But through the haze, Elise's violet eyes saw everything. She wasn't seeing shapes anymore. She was seeing the fundamental vibration of life. To her, the dust was a translucent mist. She saw the panicked, frantic pulses of the courtiers, bright, flickering blues and yellows. She saw the royal guards, their auras a steady, disciplined orange. And then she saw the wrought green shadows. 12 men were moving through the smoke with military precision. They wore gas masks that masked their scents and carried silver-edged blades that hummed with a lethal, anti-wolf frequency. They weren't rogues. They were Valerius's private kill squad, trained to take down an alpha king when he was at his most vulnerable. "Samuel!" Elise's voice cut through the ringing in his ears. "To your left. Low." Samuel didn't hesitate. He didn't ask how she knew. He dropped into a crouch, his claws extending with a metallic snick, just as a silver blade whistled through the air where his throat had been a millisecond before. With a roar that vibrated in Elise's very marrow, Samuel lunged. He didn't shift fully. There wasn't room in the debris, but his form blurred, his muscles bulging beneath his shredded silk shirt. He gutted the first assassin in a single, fluid stroke. "More are coming," Elise cried out, her heart hammering against her ribs. 6 from the pillars, 3 from the balcony. She felt a surge of power from the silver bracelet on her wrist. It wasn't just a mark of ownership anymore. It was a conduit. She realized she could feel the intent of the attackers before they even moved. "Stay behind me," Samuel commanded, his voice a ragged growl. He stood before the dais, a wall of gold and shadow. Blood, his own and that of the assassins, spattered his face, making him look like the god of war the legends spoke of. But the assassins were elite. They knew Samuel's strength, and they didn't fight him head-on. They threw silver nets, designed to burn and entangle. One caught Samuel's shoulder, the silver wire hissing as it bit into his skin. He let out a choked sound of agony, his knees buckling. "Samuel!" Elise stepped forward, leaving the safety of the throne. The violet light in her eyes flared, illuminating the dust around her like a halo. She saw the assassin aiming a crossbow at Samuel's heart, his finger tightening on the trigger. Time seemed to liquefy. Elise didn't think. She didn't have time for a plan. She reached out, her hand opening toward the assassin. "Stop!" It wasn't a word spoken with her voice. It was a command issued from the depths of her soul. The air in the hall solidified. The crossbow bolt fired, but it didn't travel. It froze in midair, caught in a telekinetic grip of pure spirit energy. The assassin himself was thrown backward by a shockwave of violet force, his aura shattered like glass. The room fell into a terrifying, unnatural stillness. The dust began to settle, revealing the carnage. Samuel tore the silver net from his shoulder with a snarl of defiance, his wounds already smoking as they began to knit back together. Valerius stood near the shattered east wall, his gas mask discarded, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He held a second detonator in his hand. "You think a few parlor tricks make you a queen?" Valerius shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "You are a defect, a mistake of nature. If I cannot have the crown, I will bury you both in the ruins of this palace." "You will bury no one, Valerius," Samuel said, his voice dropping into a register that made the floorboards vibrate. He began to walk toward the traitor, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic. Thud, thud, thud. "Stay back. I'll press it. I'll bring the whole roof down." Valerius's thumb hovered over the button. Elise looked up. Through her spirit sight, she saw the structural integrity of the ceiling. The explosion had cracked the primary obsidian arch. If Valerius pressed that button, the palace wouldn't just collapse. It would become a tomb for everyone inside. The innocent servants, the elders, and the guards. "Samuel, stop," Elise whispered. Samuel didn't stop. His eyes were molten gold, his wolf, Ragnar, fully in control now. He wanted blood. He wanted to feel Valerius's spine snap beneath his hands. "Samuel, look at the ceiling!" Elise screamed. But Samuel was gone. The monster had taken the lead, fueled by the sight of the silver burns on his own skin and the terror in Elise's eyes. He lunged. Valerius's eyes widened. He pressed the button. A series of small, rhythmic clicks echoed through the hall. Click, click, click. Nothing happened. Valerius stared at the detonator in confusion, frantically mashing the button. Elise stood with her hand outstretched, her silver bracelet glowing with such intensity, it was blinding. She wasn't just stopping a bolt, she was holding the very circuits of the bombs together with her will, preventing the spark from reaching the powder. Her nose began to bleed. The strain was immense, a pressure in her skull that felt like a hot iron. "Kill him, Samuel," she gasped, her voice strained. "Do it now." "I can't." "Hold it." Samuel reached Valerius in a blur of motion. He didn't use a blade. He grabbed Valerius by the throat and slammed him against the jagged remains of the pillar. The sound of bone meeting stone echoed through the hall. Samuel's claws were at Valerius's jugular. One twitch, and it would be over. The god of war would have his tribute. But then Samuel looked back. He saw Elise trembling, her violet eyes clouded with pain, her hand shaking as she held back the destruction of his home. He saw the girl who had touched his wolf and brought silence to the storm. He saw that if he killed Valerius in cold blood, in front of the entire kingdom, he would be giving Valerius exactly what he wanted, a tyrant for a king. The silence in the hall was absolute. Every wolf held their breath. Samuel's claws drew a single bead of blood from Valerius's neck. Valerius closed his eyes, waiting for the end. Samuel let out a long, shuddering breath. He retracted his claws. "No," Samuel whispered. "Death is too easy for you." He threw Valerius to the floor like a piece of refuse. "Elias, take him! The obsidian mines! Chain him in the dark until he forgets what the sun looks like." As the guards swarmed Valerius, Elise finally let go. The golden glow of the bracelet faded, and she collapsed. Samuel caught her before she hit the marble. He pulled her against his chest, his heart hammering against hers. "I have you," he whispered, his voice broken. "I have you, Elise." Elise leaned her head against his shoulder, her vision starting to swim as the exhaustion took hold. But as she looked at the wreckage of the hall, she saw something beautiful. The auras of the survivors weren't blue or orange anymore. They were shifting, turning into a soft, harmonious violet. They weren't afraid of the king anymore. They were in awe of the queen. But as Samuel carried her toward the infirmary, Elise felt a cold shiver. The bombs hadn't gone off, but the structural crack in the obsidian arch was still there. And as they passed under it, a single shard of black glass fell, shattering at Samuel's feet. The palace was safe, but the foundation of their world had been irrevocably altered. 3 months passed, and the obsidian palace began to breathe with a rhythm it had not known in centuries. The scorched marble of the Great Hall was being replaced with obsidian veined with silver, and the heavy, oppressive silence that once haunted the corridors had been replaced by the sound of hammers, the low hum of voices, and most shockingly, the scent of growing things. Elise sat in the center of the royal gardens. She was no longer wearing the scratchy gray wool of a servant or the heavy, restrictive velvets Samuel had first draped over her. She wore a simple gown of white linen that caught the pale mountain sun. Her vision was a strange, beautiful paradox. She saw the physical world, the jagged peaks of the mountains, the deep green of the pines, but layered over it was the vibrant, pulsing world of spirits. She saw the golden sap of the trees as a glowing circulatory system. She saw the wind as shimmering ribbons of translucent silk. Beside her, Samuel stood like a sentinel. He was different now. The dark circles under his eyes had vanished, replaced by a clarity that made him look younger, yet more formidable. His wolf, Ragnar, was no longer a screaming beast in his mind. He was a silent, contented presence, usually resting his mental head on the image of Elise's feet. "The emissaries from the northern and southern packs have arrived," Samuel said, his voice no longer a gravelly growl, but a deep, resonant baritone. "They are waiting in the courtyard. They expect to see the god of war and his cure." Elise stood, her fingers instinctively tracing the silver bracelet on her wrist. She had asked the royal smith to change it. It was no longer a solid, heavy brand. It was now woven into the shape of delicate, interlocking vines, and the obsidian charm had been replaced by a fragment of the moonstone that had shattered during the battle. "Let them wait a little longer," Elise said, a playful smile touching her lips. "I want them to see the queen before they see the oracle." Samuel reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His touch still sent those golden sparks through her, but now they felt like a warm hearth rather than a lightning strike. "You are both, Elise, and you are the only person in this world who isn't afraid of me. That's because I can see your soul, Samuel. It's quite difficult to be afraid of someone whose spirit looks like a very large, very grumpy golden retriever when he's happy." Samuel let out a rare, booming laugh that echoed off the stone walls. It was the sound of a man who had finally learned how to breathe. But as they walked toward the grand balcony overlooking the courtyard, the atmosphere shifted. Below, hundreds of wolves from across the continent had gathered. They were skeptical, their auras a muddy mix of doubt, jealousy, and fear. They had heard the stories of the blind girl who broke the moonstone, of the king who spared a traitor. Many believed it was a weakness. Many believed the god of war had been tamed into a lapdog. Samuel stepped onto the balcony first. The crowd went silent, a wave of instinctual submission rippling through the ranks as his alpha aura washed over them. It was a cold, sharp pressure, reminding them that he was still the most dangerous predator on the continent. Then, Elise stepped out beside him. She didn't hide behind him. She walked to the very edge of the stone railing. She raised her hand, and the fragment of the moonstone on her wrist caught the sunlight, refracting it into 1,000 violet shards that danced across the faces of the crowd. "I am Elise Vane," she began, her voice amplified by the spirit energy she drew from the earth beneath the palace. It wasn't a shout, but it echoed in the minds of every wolf present. "Many of you were told I was a defect. Many of you were told I was a burden to be discarded." She looked directly at the alpha of the Southern Pack, a man who had openly advocated for her exile weeks prior. Her violet eyes flared with a sudden, blinding intensity. "I see the darkness you carry," she said softly, yet her voice felt like a thunderclap in the alpha's head. "I see the rot of greed in your heart, Alpha Thorn. And I see the fear that keeps you from being the leader your people deserve." Thorn gasped, falling to his knees as if struck. The crowd murmured in terror. This wasn't a cure. This wasn't a gentle Omega who had calmed a beast. This was something far more terrifying. This was a woman who could see the truth of their souls. "We did not bring you here to bow to us," Elise continued, her gaze sweeping over the masses. "We brought you here to witness a new era. The time of ruling through fear is over. The god of war has found his peace, and the spirit walker has found her voice." She turned to Samuel. In front of the entire continent, she took the hand of the most feared man alive. "The strength of a kingdom is not measured by the sharpness of its claws," she declared. "It is measured by the connection between its souls. If you seek a tyrant, you will find none here. But if you seek a queen who will fight for the discarded, the defects, and the forgotten, then you have found your home." For a long, agonizing minute, no one moved. Then, the high priestess stepped forward from the shadows of the pillars. She raised her staff and let out a rhythmic, haunting howl, the call of the first line. One by one, the wolves in the courtyard began to shift, not into their beast forms, but into a posture of true, soul-deep reverence. They didn't drop their heads in fear. They raised them in hope. But as the cheers began to rise, Elise felt a sudden, sharp pull at the center of her being. Her spirit vision flickered. The golden auras of the crowd blurred, replaced by a cold, encroaching darkness that seemed to seep out of the very mountainside. She gripped Samuel's hand, her knuckles turning white. "Elise." "What is it?" Samuel whispered, his protective instincts instantly flaring. "Something is coming, Samuel," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the distant northern horizon. "The trial of the moonstone. It didn't just wake me up. It woke up something else. Something that has been hungry for a long, long time." Far away, beyond the obsidian peaks, a shadow moved against the snow. A shadow that had no aura, no soul, and no mercy. The shadow that descended from the northern peaks was not an army of flesh and bone, but a tide of freezing mist that swallowed the stars. It was the Hallowed King, an ancient, primordial echo of every war ever fought, a manifestation of the very bloodlust that Samuel had nearly drowned in before Elise touched his soul. It was drawn to the obsidian palace like a moth to a flame, hungering for the light that Elise had kindled. As the temperature plummeted, The courtyard fell into a terrified silence. The breath of the gathered wolves turned to ice in the air. "Get inside!" Samuel roared, his alpha command snapping the crowd out of their trance. "To the Great Hall! Now!" He turned to Elise, his face a mask of primal terror. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of the monster. He was afraid for his heart. "Elise, you have to go with them. This isn't a man. It's a void. My blades cannot cut shadow." "Neither can your fear, Samuel," Elise said, her voice steady even as she felt the bone-deep chill of the approaching entity. "It isn't here to kill us. It's here because it's hungry. It has been fed on hatred for 1,000 years, and it doesn't know how to stop." The mist coalesced into a towering figure at the palace gates, a gargantuan wolf made of swirling ash and jagged ice, its eyes two pits of absolute nothingness. It let out a sound that wasn't a howl, but the collective scream of 1,000 lost souls. Samuel shifted. The sound of his bones snapping and reforming was like thunder in the courtyard. In his place stood a massive black wolf with fur like midnight and eyes of molten gold. Ragnar. He stood between Elise and the shadow, his hackles raised, his growl vibrating the very foundations of the mountain. The shadow wolf lunged. Ragnar met it with a ferocity that shook the earth. They collided in a blur of shadow and gold, but every time Samuel's claws struck the mist, they passed through as if hitting smoke. The shadow wolf, however, left streaks of frost and black rot on Samuel's flank. Samuel let out a pained yelp, the sound tearing through Elise's heart. "Stop!" Elise screamed. She ran toward the battle, her linen dress whipping in the freezing wind. The silver and moonstone bracelet on her wrist began to glow with a violet fire so intense it turned the falling snow into sparks of light. "Elise, get back!" Samuel's voice echoed in her mind, desperate and bleeding. "No more fighting!" she cried out. She didn't reach for a weapon. She reached for the moonstone fragment. She pried it from the silver vines of her bracelet, the jagged rock biting into her palm, just as the glass had done on the night they met. She stood directly in the path of the shadow wolf. The entity slowed, its void-like eyes fixing on her. It saw not a girl, but a beacon. It lunged, its massive jaws open to swallow her whole. Elise didn't flinch. She closed her eyes and projected everything she felt. The warmth of the heated SUV seats, the scent of sandalwood and peace, the rhythm of the twins' heartbeats in her womb, and the silence she had brought to Samuel's mind. She offered the spirit the one thing it had never known: mercy. "You are tired," she whispered, her voice amplified by the spirit energy of the mountain. "You have carried the weight of our ancestors' rage for too long. You don't have to be a monster anymore. You can rest." She held up the moonstone fragment. The violet light didn't explode this time. It flowed outward like a gentle tide of lavender water. It touched the shadow wolf, and where it touched, the ash began to turn into white snow. The jagged ice melted into rain. The spirit let out one final haunting sigh. It bowed its massive head toward Elise, its void eyes softening into a pale, star-lit gray. Then, with a sound like a distant wind chime, the shadow shattered into 1,000,000 snowflakes that drifted harmlessly to the ground. The sun broke through the clouds, bathing the courtyard in a sudden, brilliant gold. Samuel shifted back, collapsing onto the stone floor, his body covered in frost burns. Elise was at his side in a heartbeat, pulling his head into her lap, her hands glowing with a soft, healing light as she pressed the moonstone to his chest. "You stayed," Samuel wheezed, his eyes searching hers. "You stayed in the path of the monster." "I told you, Samuel," she whispered, tears of relief blurring her vision. "I love the beast, because he chose to be a man for me." The courtyard was no longer a place of judgment. The alphas of the other packs stepped forward, not to challenge, but to help Samuel to his feet. The silver bracelet, now empty of its stone but still beautiful in its silver vine design, remained on Elise's wrist, a symbol of a bond that was no longer a chain, but a choice. The healing had begun, not just for a king and not just for a girl, but for a world that had forgotten how to see in the dark. 6 months later, the gardens of the Obsidian Palace were no longer a graveyard of jagged stone and freezing wind. For the first time in centuries, the earth had softened. Purple heather, white snowdrops, and wild lavender now blanketed the cliffs, their scent mingling with the crisp, clean air of the peaks. The land, once as cold and harsh as the heart of its king, had begun to bloom. Elise sat on a stone bench overlooking the valley, her violet eyes tracing the flight of a golden eagle nesting miles away. Her vision was whole now, a blend of the physical beauty of the world and the shimmering, peaceful auras of the life she had helped to foster. She felt the heavy, rhythmic thrum of a heartbeat behind her, long before she heard the footsteps. Samuel didn't need to speak. His presence was a warm hearth against her back. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He smelled of sandalwood, cedar, and a deep, soul-level contentment. Ragnar, the wolf who had once been a storm of violence, was now a quiet guardian, resting in the sun-drenched corridors of Samuel's mind. "The council meeting is over already?" Elise asked, a smile playing on her lips. "They are debating trade tariffs on wool," Samuel murmured, his voice a soft vibration against her skin. "I decided the flowers were more important. And my wife." He sat beside her, taking her hand. He played with the silver vine bracelet on her wrist, his thumb tracing the empty setting where the moonstone had once been. They didn't need the artifact anymore. The magic wasn't in the stone. It was in the silence they shared. "Do you ever regret it, Samuel?" she asked suddenly, looking at the scar on his jaw, the one she had first touched in the dark. Sparing them? Changing everything? Samuel looked out at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, the colors of Elise's eyes. "I spent 20 years fearing the monster I was," he said quietly. "And you spent 20 years in the dark, feared by the people who should have protected you. Every day since the moonstone shattered, I wake up and I hear nothing but the wind. No screaming, no bloodlust, just peace. I don't regret a single second of the journey that led me to this silence." Elise leaned her head against his shoulder. "The world is changing, Samuel. They call you the peacekeeper now, not the god of war." "I prefer Samuel," he said, kissing her forehead. Elise smiled, taking his large, calloused hand and placing it flat against her stomach. "I think you'll have to get used to a new name soon." Samuel froze. He concentrated, his alpha senses sharpening. And there, faint but unmistakable, he heard it. A second heartbeat, and then a third. A tiny, rhythmic fluttering of life that carried the strength of the Alpha King and the grace of the Spirit Walker. "Twins," Samuel choked out, his voice trembling with a vulnerability he would never have shown to anyone else. "Two strong little pups," Elise confirmed, tears of joy reflecting the golden sunset. The Alpha King, the man who had once crushed kingdoms under his boot, let out a shout of pure, unbridled joy that echoed across the mountains. He pulled her into his lap, weeping with a happiness that finally washed away the last traces of the monster. The defect and the beast were gone. In their place stood a family, born from the dark, but living forever in the light. As the sun disappeared behind the peaks, leaving the world in a soft, hopeful twilight, Elise closed her eyes. She didn't need to see the future to know it was beautiful. The monster was gone, The king remained, and he had everything. And that is the incredible journey of the Alpha King and the blind Omega, who proved that true power isn't found in claws or strength, but in the courage to be vulnerable. It's a story of how love can tame the most dangerous beasts, and how the most overlooked people are often the ones holding the key to our salvation. If this story touched your heart, please smash that like button and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that healing is always possible. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next epic romance. We have a brand new tale coming next week, featuring a billionaire mafia boss and a runaway bride that you absolutely won't want to miss. Thank you for watching, and remember, your power is in your soul.